Okay. It is 6:01 p.m. and I'd like to call this work session to order. Instructions on how to participate virtually are included on the City Council calendar item listed on the front page of missionks.org. And tonight we will begin a discussion of the 2024 International Building Codes. Mr. Scott, would you please begin tonight's presentation?
Right, thank you, Mr. President. But we're going to talk about all the codes, not just the International Building Code. So. PowerPoint to get pulled up here. All right. So thank you again for the opportunity tonight to present to you the 2024 building codes. This is going to be kind of our first pass at it. We talked about it back in the fall, kind of gave an overview of the code process. But since that time, we've really kind of gotten into the weeds, no pun intended, and really looked at the codes and started developing some amendments to adopt the 2024 codes. So that's kind of the point of tonight's presentation. I thought we'd start off by meeting the department, and then from there, we'll kind of go over why we have building codes, why those are important, and then our code adoption process, both nationally and here in the metropolitan area. Then we'll review recommendations primarily for the International Building Code, Residential Code, and the Energy Conservation Code. All right, next. Okay. I'm going to kind of start from left to right. So this is the Community Development Department. And Neil Afonska is a gentleman in the green shirt on the right. Neil is our Community Development Coordinator. Probably most of you know Neil. He's been with the city for quite a while now. And Neil wears a lot of different hats. One of his primary roles with the city is he's responsible for a rental license program. So that's both long-term and short-term rentals. Anytime, not only does he do annual inspections of all the apartment complexes, but anytime we have any issue with rental property, we'll have somebody fill out a tenant inspection form, and he's the one who gets that and follows through that inspection. So he's really kind of touching the codes from the perspective of the property maintenance code, as well as some of our building codes and residential codes. So he's a little bit involved in that process. The gentleman next to him in the kind of the red sweatshirt is Devin Bryant. He's our building inspector. He's been with us for about 3 years now. He's the one out in the field every day doing inspections. So he's touching all of the codes. The other gentleman kind of standing between Devin and myself is David Binkley. David is our neighborhood services officer, more commonly referred to as our code enforcement officer. And he's really the one that works the property maintenance code. So he's out about town every day looking for abandoned vehicles or inoperable vehicles, tall grass, shutters that might be falling off buildings or gutters are falling down, and really kind of looking towards applying that code to the structures that he sees to make sure that they are safe and habitable and not a blight to the community. Of course, there's myself in the middle. And we all know Taylor. She's our senior planner. This is our building official. It is 1 year anniversary yesterday. Yeah, you're off probation now, so congratulations. Courtney comes to us from Wichita. He was a building official for the city of Wichita for almost 30 years. And he retired there and moved up to the Kansas City area a few years ago to be with family. He's got a daughter who lives up here and 2 little ones, which I met this afternoon, Isabella and Aurora. And so he gets to spend a lot of time with them. Courtney spent a couple of years with Kansas City Mo as an inspector and a plans review examiner before coming to us. And we're really glad to have him. He's got a wealth of wisdom and has really hit the ground running. And he's really kind of not only the building official, he's one that reviews all the plans that come in, make sure they're compliant with the code. But he's also out in the field with Devin and Nilo and David. kind of examining all the situations and playing backup and oftentimes doing inspections with Devin right along with them. So, and then the young woman on the far left is Anisha Bahari. And Anisha's been with us since January. She's our administrative assistant, and she is a rock star. She's really kind of the one that makes everything work. She brings in the applications, processes those, gets the information to either Devin or Courtney. She's kind of really the front of the department, literally and figuratively. She sits right out here at the desk by the window. Yeah.
Would you mind spelling that? Just
Bandahari, Bandhari, I believe is the spelling. Yeah, Bandahari. Yeah. So that is the community development department. And we ensure safety and more. So our primary responsibility is to provide consistent framework that helps the city to grow safely and responsibly. We're enforcing the standards, communities that can reduce risk, protect property, and create an environment that are both functional and resilient for the people who live and work here. So there's Devin and Courtney actually doing a home inspection. That picture in the middle is a home that exploded a few months ago on String Line Road or String Lane. I put that photograph in there because it's kind of evident of some of the problems that we're dealing with right now. We're having a pretty high turnover in homes where people are buying the homes, going in and doing cosmetic fixtures to the home and then selling it again. And they're often doing that without permits. And that was the case here. This gentleman bought the home and started doing some improvements to the house, was not doing them in a safe manner, and there was a gas explosion. So that home is going to probably be demolished. I think we talked to somebody the other day. They're planning now to demolish the home and bring plans in for a new home. I had a photograph in there of the structure in the Hy-Vee Park for the garden area. If you've driven by Hy-Vee recently, you've seen these structures in the parking lot for their garden center. Courtney drove by a few weeks ago and noticed it was going up. So he pulled into the parking lot and went and looked at them. They don't meet code. They're not secured to the ground in a safe manner. And they don't have proper fire protection in them, like a fire extinguisher. Because those were actually to catch on fire. Somebody had a cigarette, just kind of threw it into one of the plants and it smoldered, and that awning above would catch on fire. So those are the kind of things that Devin and Courtney and everybody's looking for when they're out in the field. So we had a conversation with the manager at Hy-Vee and make sure they became compliant with the code. So those are the things that we do on a daily basis. Okay. So why do we need building codes? Some of what I was just talking about, set consistent minimum standards for safety, health, and structural integrity in buildings. Ensure that homes, offices, and public spaces are constructed in a way that protects people from hazards like fires, collapses, and severe weather, some of those things I just mentioned. Playing a role in long-term community well-being, accessibility, energy efficiency, and environmental impact are some of those components for the well-being of our community. And then ensuring that sustainable development and usable spaces for people of all abilities. So those are some of the primary drivers behind why we have building codes. The building code adoption process. So the international building codes are developed by the International Code Council, which is a nonprofit organization. It's a national organization, almost an international organization. I think both communities in North America, as well as Canada, utilize that set of codes. And it's made up of folks like Courtney and myself, municipalities and agencies that have jurisdiction over codes, as well as architects and engineers and contractors and people in the trades. They're all participating in that organization, helping to develop safe codes. Every 3 years, they develop a new set of codes. So they're constantly going through a code cycle where they're reviewing changes in the industry, changes in building methodology, new materials that are coming out. and seeing how those apply to the codes and how the codes can be updated to reflect those changes that are occurring in the industry. And there's a review cycle where commentary is accepted, and then everyone votes on it, and then the code's developed and it's issued. This is a set of codes. All 12 or 13 of them or so. So they eventually will wind up in a book like this that people purchase and review, and that becomes the code. Okay, next slide. So since they're done every 3 years, everybody in the Kansas City area kind of skips a cycle and adopts every other set of codes on a 6-year cycle. And a lot of that is frankly because we don't have the time to be reviewing codes every 3 years. And there's just not much of a change every 3 years to really have a meaningful impact. So 6 years is more reflective of meaningful changes that are occurring in the industry. Most cities have adopted the 2018 edition of the codes. That's kind of what everybody's on right now in the Kansas City area. Typically, all the cities in the Kansas City area have worked together to adopt a set of codes. So the Johnson County Building Officials Organization has been meeting for about 2 years now, reviewing the codes and talking about changes in the code and how that impacts cities in the area, and taking feedback from contractors and utilities and other key stakeholders that would have an impact on the codes or be affected by the codes.
Ask you a quick question, Brian.
Yeah.
Is the primary rationale for the code adoption the external or is it internal as well? For instance, I don't believe City Hall is ADA compliant. How would that affect it?
So it's both internal and external. When the codes are adopted, and when a building is built under a certain set of codes, that becomes the applicable codes at hand. So just because we're adopting new set of codes doesn't mean that old buildings have to come up to the new set of codes unless there's significant renovations. And that's usually about 50% or more that has to come up to the new set of codes. So I think this building was built in 1980s. I don't know what set of codes that would have been at the time, but it meets that set of codes.
It meets that set of
Yeah.
codes.
Mhm.
Father
Yeah.
did, so you do either tear down and rebuild or major renovation.
Thank you.
The reason why we all kind of meet together and work on adoption of the codes is really kind of a uniformity across all the jurisdictions. It's a little bit of, everybody, the designers and the engineers that work in the Kansas City area, that kind of a general understanding of what the codes are and what's one city's doing versus another city. There's not a lot of room for interpretation. There's not a lot of room for kind of playing one off another, like, well, they do it this way in Overland Park, but you guys do it that way. So we try to keep it all uniform, but to that extent, especially in the last few years, we've also begun to recognize that communities are different. And every governing body has kind of its own set of policies and objectives that they want to achieve. Cities have different needs. Olathe or Overland Park is going to be a lot different than Roland Park or Mission. They're kind of fast-growing cities. Us, not so much. We're more of a stable, fully built-out community. So our needs are going to be a little bit different than other communities. So, as I stated, we adopted the 2018 building codes, and we adopted those under Chapter 500. And each article reflects a different code that we adopted. So there's the International Building Code, Residential Code, Fuel, Gas, Plumbing, Mechanical, Existing Building, Electrical, Property Maintenance, Fire Code, and Energy Conservation Code. And with each of the adoption of each of these codes, we made certain amendments to those codes, and I'll talk a little bit about that. And as I said earlier, each one of these books represents one of these codes. Sometimes 2 books represent a code. So there's quite a bit to it. So as I said earlier, tonight, we're really going to focus on the International Building Code, the International Residential Code, and the International Energy Conservation Code. The International Building Code is really kind of the overarching code book. So that really applies to all the codes. It's like an umbrella, if you will. So a lot of the provisions in the building code are applicable to other codes, and it kind of references the other codes in that book. It really kind of sets general parameters for how Courtney does his job, how contractors work, how permits are pulled, fees are collected, inspections done, et cetera. It's primarily for commercial buildings, multifamily buildings. As I said, it's kind of the overarching code. The residential code is really more for detached 1 and 2 family homes and townhomes. So small apartment buildings of 3 or 4 units. And then the conservation code, the energy conservation code, really covers for both residential and commercial minimum requirements for things like insulation, windows, air sealing, lighting and heating systems, all in an effort to reduce energy consumption. Okay. So what do staff recommendations include? I'm sure you've read through the packet and you looked at all these code amendments that we're making. What you'll find is that there are omissions, amendments, and additions. So in some cases, we'll be omitting a certain section of the code. And that often is something that's not really applicable to mission. And a great example of that is the Board of Code Appeals. So each code references an appeal process. If somebody doesn't agree with the decision that Courtney made on interpretation of the code, they have an opportunity to go to a Board of Code Appeals. And the code will stipulate how that board is formed and what jurisdiction it has, and et cetera. We omitted that out of each of the codes because we have a code in our code book that addresses that. And so we actually have a Board of Code Appeals already on the books. Amendments. There will be times where there are provisions in the code that we will amend to kind of beef up, if you will, and make it more applicable to us in mission. And I'll kind of go through some of that tonight, and you'll see how that kind of works in a little bit more detail. And then there are additions. There are things that are not in the code that we feel should be in the code. So again, more for us and for those in the Kansas City area, we'll add those provisions to a particular section of the code book. So Article 2, the 2024 International Building Code. And these are some examples. We added a section license required. And it essentially states that anyone that pulls a building permit to do work in the city of Mission must have a Johnson County contractor's license. So Johnson County has a contractor license program. And anybody that does work in Johnson County is required to have a license through that program. And it just certifies essentially that they're a legitimate contractor and they have a basic understanding of the building codes and they kind of know what they're doing. It's sort of the good housekeeping seal of approval, if you will. And the program actually provides annual training to all the contractors to kind of keep them up to date on trends that are occurring in the industry, updates to the codes, et cetera.
And does that apply to subcontractors as well, or just
Yes.
okay, great, thank you.
I have a question also. So my question is that, is this a Johnson County requirement and then it comes down to us?
It's,
Or are we the only ones that have this?
everybody has it.
So it's a
So
Johnson
it's
County.
throughout Johnson County. The program was actually volunteered. So all the cities participated in the program on a voluntary basis. But now everybody just kind of does it. So it's
Okay.
been around for so long that it's just I almost feel like it's mandatory in a way.
Thank you.
And I will say the exception to this is the individual homeowner. So if an individual homeowner that can prove they own the home and live in the house, they can apply for a building permit without a license, but they have to do the work. So if I live in a house and I apply for a building permit, I can't turn around and have my buddy Courtney, the contractor, do the work. I have to be the one who's going to actually do the work. And I have to pull the permit and show the plans and pay the fee and have all the necessary inspections. But I have the right to do my work in my own home. Work commencing before permit issuance. This is another problem we've had. So as we go around town, we will often drive by somebody that's got a dumpster sitting in the driveway. It's full of junk. Or we'll see something like, "Oh, I wonder what that's about." Yeah. And we'll go back to the office and we'll find out that there's not a building permit pulled for that address. And again, a lot of it is those folks, like I showed you earlier, the gentleman with the house that blew up. It's people that will buy a home and go in there and start doing work. And they do this all over the Kansas City area. And they can go into the bigger cities like KCMO or Overland Park and do this kind of work and never get caught. Since we're in a smaller community and our staff is out in the field every day, there's a higher chance they're going to get caught. And they usually do. And so at that point, we tell them that the permit fee is now double. That's essentially their penalty for doing work without a permit. We made an amendment to notice.
I would mention there that, so that's a penalty, but if they've done the work incorrectly, they're required to redo
Yeah.
the work. So in addition, it doesn't give them a pass to have done work that doesn't meet the code. They pay double the permit fee and then they have to go in and correct the work and bring it up to the correct standard.
And that's double for just the instance that we find them
Yeah.
incorrect with,
So
not an ongoing forever, you have double.
Yeah, we had a house, a great example. I can't think of, I think it's on Maple. We had a house on Maple that was a property maintenance issue. It was in bad shape. It actually had holes in the siding. And so David had worked with the property owner, you got holes in the side of your house, grass is, you need to get this taken care of. And he had discovered that he was at a point where he could not even afford the utilities and he had his utilities cut off. So we worked with him to kind of get the utility bills paid off and get his utilities back up and running. But he just couldn't make the repairs on the home. So he ultimately sold the home. And kind of just went away for a while. And then David was out driving by one day and noticed a new air conditioner unit being installed. I wonder what's going on there. So he came back and told Devin. Sure enough, there hadn't been a building permit pulled. So Courtney and Devin went up there and kind of looked around inside the windows and they could see where the whole house had been renovated. Somebody had gone in there and just torn out walls, opened up the ceiling, made it look brand new. So we found the property owner and did a little research on the internet and found out this guy was basically a house flipper. That's kind of what he does. He advertises that and here's how you can make $1 million, and that's his deal. Yep. Yeah, he actually has YouTube videos and the whole work. I wanted to put my fist through his face, but Courtney's kinder and nicer than I am at times. So his patience prevailed. But yeah, we went through, we looked at that house, we got in there, we found out he had done all kinds of work incorrectly. He had to tear it all out and basically start over again. So.
Is Courtney actually going out and assessing if the improvements have been done correctly?
Mhm. Yep. Courtney probably spends about half his day out in the field doing building inspections.
So someone could have a permit, but they portrayed the improvements wrong.
Yeah, I mean, we're doing inspections. So when you pull a building permit, there's a series of inspections that have to be done before that work is approved. And we can give you a certificate of occupancy saying that work has been done correctly and that structure is, safe to go.
Thanks.
The final one is work hours. We have a provision in our code, but we stuck it into the building code section as well. Basically, there's a proper time to do work, and that's Monday through Friday, 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. On Saturdays, 8 to 6. Sunday, no work. We've gotten complaints about people doing work on Sundays. If it's a private property owner, we won't really push the issue too much because we realize that person's probably working and that's the only time they can get the work done. But what comes to mind is Mission Flats. They were pressed to get the project done because they had to deliver to their owner by the end of the year. And so those guys were literally working 7 days a week. And they were working on Sundays and they were playing the radio, and somebody contacted us and said, this is ridiculous. And you're right. So we contacted the superintendent and said, stop. Can't work on Sundays. Don't play the radio loud. Okay, we amended a section on residential driveways to allow for permeable paving systems. So that one's for you, Councilmember Kring. So you can have concrete slabs, paving blocks, or grids or turf blocks. We added a pretty sizable section under the IBC, and we duplicated this in the IRC for physical security. So surprisingly, there's really nothing in either of those codes that speaks to reinforcing a dwelling unit to prevent or try to slow down unlawful entry. And so we, and I literally took this from Overland Park and it's dropped into ours. And it's ditto what Westwood did. And I think Casey Mo's done this. It's just a set of standards around reinforcing windows, reinforcing door frames, deadbolt locks, longer screws that attach the door hinge to the frame. So really kind of prevent somebody from getting into the dwelling that shouldn't be getting into that dwelling unit. So that's a pretty detailed section that's highlighted under the IBC and the IRC amendments in your packet. Okay, the 2024 International Building Code, the IRC. We amended a section on prohibited drainage. So we kind of beefed this section up to state that gutters, sump pumps, and drains cannot discharge within 10 feet of a property line. And that shall be a prima facie evidence of a violation if there is a discharge within 10 feet or less and the adjacent property is experiencing stormwater damage. We also have some language in there that requires site plan for grade changes greater than 3%. We've had some problems with new home construction where there's stormwater runoff onto the adjacent property owners. And this is the property in Barclay we dealt with a few years ago, Mr. Haas. And so, yeah, so we're trying to find an opportunity to kind of beef up some language in our codes to try to prevent that in the future. And then in the IRC,
Brian, when you,
Sorry.
when we say that it's evidence of a violation, is that intended to mean that we don't care how it got that way, when it got that way, whether it was grandfathered or not? You just, if we find it that way, you got to fix it. So I know I can think of some properties where this condition exists now,
yeah,
but no work will have been done under this new code. So.
yeah. And I think that's going to be on a kind of case-by-case basis. If somebody got a corrugated tube and stuck it to their gutter and drained to their neighbors, well, they got an issue there, but.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, but this is really for new home construction. In that particular case I was referencing, they had a French drain that they buried in their backyard. And I went out there several times and I finally found it gurgling about 3 feet away from the property line. And I think that was the cause of a lot of the drainage issues that Mr. Haas was experiencing. So something we need to be catching early on when reviewing plans and going out and doing inspections. There's a provision in the IRC, and we'll speak more to this in the next few slides, but there is some provisions in the existing IRC around energy efficiency. And that's really, in some cases, not so much in the Kansas City area, but in other parts of the country, cities will adopt one section, one code book, but not another. So you might have somebody adopt an IRC, but never adopt the energy conservation code. So the ICC will sometimes kind of duplicate provisions in different codes to sort of catch things like that. In this case, the energy rating index, we have suggested that it be set to a score of 60. And that will make more sense as I go a little bit further into the presentation. But just kind of keep that in mind. Actually, I forgot we have this next section here. So the IRC, typically right now, they're requiring an energy rating index for our zone, which is zone 4, to be 53. And a lot of the cities have been talking about the energy rating index primarily around the Energy Conservation Code for 2 years now. And what's the right amount? Most cities are looking at about 65, give or take. Roland Park, Westwood have both adopted codes, and they're setting their energy rating index at 60. Now, Shawnee, on the other hand, set it at 70. The higher the number, the less energy efficient. The lower the number, the more energy efficient. The code sets it at 53, which is super energy efficient for our region. We're suggesting that we set it at 60.
We have a slide with, as Brian mentioned,
Yeah,
we'll cover that.
We'll cover that in a little bit more
The
detail.
places where
Energy issues that we've been talking about and those HERS ratings overlap with the residential code. You also have a separate handout, and which we won't spend a lot of time going over, but we wanted to provide just a little bit more in terms of definitions about what is the HERS rating, why is it important, and then for at least a single family home, what are the kinds of things that the energy code will cover. But so it's a preview of what's to come, and more explanation. But our current HERS rating in the 2018 codes
The 2018 IRC is 80.
is 80. So we're sitting at 80 right now.
Yeah,
Right, it's 53.
60.
well, we're recommending
60, yeah.
The code unamended would be 53.
How are we going to do that?
No, we're going to require builders to build to it. So I'll get into a little bit more of that. But there's a monkey wrench. State legislature threw a monkey wrench into all of that. They passed Senate Bill 418, which was signed into law by Governor Kelly. And Senate Bill 418 is called the Buy Right Housing Development Act. And the intentions are good. Promote the development of housing by streamlining the residential development approval process in order to facilitate construction of additional housing in the state of Kansas. It's applicable to single-family, townhomes, and ADUs. It limits a review period for new construction to 30 days. So when an application for a permit is submitted to the city, we have 30 days to review it and approve it or deny it. That's not a big deal for us because we usually do it in about 15 days. Single-family homes are pretty simple and we can review this pretty quickly. Single-family residential use is permitted in any residentially zoned district. So we have, I think, 4 or 5, maybe 6 residentially zoned districts in the city of Mission. There's R1, single-family, R2 duplex, R3 townhome, R4 garden apartments. And typically one would think, you can't have a single family home in an R4 garden apartment. This would say you can. If somebody wants to build a single family home in one of those zoning districts, they can do that under this code.
Well, it's worse than that, right? Because it says zoned for any type of residential use.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not just the R districts.
Yeah.
Which is strange, but
Then rezoning to single family does not require written notice to property owners within 200 feet and is exempt from the protest petition. So when somebody typically wants to build a subdivision or a small duplex, they will come to the city and we'll have a public hearing, which requires notice to residents or property owners within 200 feet of that property, publication and a record of a newspaper of record for the city, the legal record in our case. And then there's a provision for a protest petition process afterwards. So residents that are affected by the rezoning have the opportunity to file a protest petition with the city within 14 days after that public hearing before the Planning Commission. For a rezoning to single family, notice to property owners with 200 feet and the protest provisions would go away. So again, it's just kind of trying to loosen up some of those regulations.
So when you rezone to a single family, it's got to come from another residential zone, correct?
No, no, it can be a commercial property that's rezoned to residential. So it doesn't like have to be another residential property. Yeah.
Yep.
Mhm.
I just have a question because I'm a little confused. On, it says that single family can be in any residential. Why is there a rezoning needed to rezone to single family if it doesn't really matter what residential zone there is?
So if it's a commercial zone property, somebody wants to buy a commercial zone property, good example of that would be a Mission Vale where they bought property in the MS2 zoning district. This is primarily commercial, but we rezoned it to residential.
But why does it have to be rezoned when they said it can, single family can be put anywhere?
Any residential zone district, not commercial.
Oh.
So if somebody had bought that property and wanted to build
Uh.
a single family home, that's a commercial zone district, not a residential. So then that next bullet applies where some of those restrictions are lessened or reduced for rezoning applications.
I think Councilmember Carpenter David.
So one of the questions I have, we have two homes associations that are quite active and they have setbacks that are different than the city of Mission. So this Senate Bill 418 would no longer allow those folks to.
Not necessarily, no.
Okay.
There's kind of a waiver for covenants that run with private property or homeowners association restrictions, deed restrictions, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, so
Could I,
even if it is rezoned to residential, all the setback provisions that are in the zoning code are still applicable. That's true as well for, HOAs.
Councilmember Crane.
commercial properties abutted against residential on my street, like the Little
Mhm.
Lambs is right next to. What are from the residential, what is the rest of the zoning on the other two properties?
That's all CP2A, basically general commercial, general retail, yeah. Now, here's the real fun part, and this gets back to what I was talking about earlier with the HERS rating. So again, to kind of streamline new housing development, there's a provision in Senate Bill 418 that speaks to construction of single-family homes that are less than 2,500 square feet. So a new single-family home construction that is less than 2,500 square feet of livable area constructed on its own lot with its own parcel ID. So it's going to be an individually owned parcel of property, not an apartment complex or a rental property like a duplex, but its own individual parcel of property. The builder is permitted to use the 2018 edition of the IRC, or the 2018 edition of the IRC is previously adopted, or the 2018 edition of the IRC for another jurisdiction. And that would be a case where if we didn't have a building safety department and we were relying on Overland Park, then we'd use their set of codes. But that second bullet point I highlighted would be applicable to us. The 2018 edition of the IRC is previously adopted with a HERS rating of 80. So we haven't quite figured out what we're going to do yet.
But most of the new builds here would be under 2,500.
That's going to be the next slide. These are all the new builds that we've had in Mission for the past 8 years. And they're scattered throughout the city. There's no one particular area. And about half of them would fall under that provision. About half of them are 2,500 square feet or less.
But they were under the old code.
All of these were built under the 2018 IRC.
How many do we think we're going to get that fit?
We average about 2 new home construction permits a year.
A year?
Yeah. And so kind of depending on what the builder does, if the builder's smart, they're going to build something that's less than 2,500 square feet. So even though we've adopted the 2024 IRC, they're going to come in and say, I'm pulling a permit for a home that's less than 2,500 square feet. And oh, by the way, that falls under the 2018 IRC that you previously adopted. So.
I mean, I think the point here is that even if we don't do anything to address this, which I have some thoughts about what we could do, it's 2 homes a year, right? And we're built out. So I mean, what I'm reading here is even if we do nothing to address the fact that the state is holding us back to older codes, we're talking about maybe 2 houses a year. So it's not that much for me to lose sleep about, but I do have some thoughts about what we could do to sort of, I don't know, incentivize higher performance
Go back to
construction.
that previous,
The
so,
previous slide.
yeah, so if you look at it, I mean, one of the options that you have is adopting an unamended 2018 IRC with that HERS rating of 62, which aligns more closely with the 60 that we're recommending in the 2024 code. So there's some ways to do it. That's
Yeah.
where we're seeing the biggest deviation right now in communities in Johnson County with the passage of this legislation in particular. So for example, we sent out this packet on Friday and Shawnee had adopted the 2024 codes with the exception of they kept the 2018 energy efficiency codes. Monday night at their council meeting, they flipped back to the 2018 IRC. So the information in your packet, 4 days later, 5 days later, isn't even accurate. And we've seen Gardner, we've seen
Emails flying all around for the past couple of weeks amongst building officials and city administrators about this provision, and cities
Yeah,
trying to figure out what to do.
I can't concern myself about 2 homes a year when we have all the other kinds of construction we're worried about. Let them get away with whatever the state wants them to get away with.
But I think that it does also raise the question of like how this applies to substantial renovations. And so I think that we would like more substantial renovations so that we can
Yeah. I mean,
move forward.
that gets into what I would like to see us do to sort of fight fire with fire is just, if you will build to the higher performance standards, we'll fast track your application up to 3,000 square feet and, cut your permit fees, whatever. Like, you want to play games in Topeka, we can do that too. So,
Yeah, those are all options. Yeah.
yeah.
Okay, yeah. International Energy Efficiency Code. This has always been kind of a one-off. So building codes are all about minimum safety standards. The Energy Efficiency Conservation Code is more about energy conservation and energy savings. And I'll be the first to admit the ICC and a lot of folks have kind of struggled over the years with that concept right there in and of itself. But the code's been around for a while and they're being used by a lot of the municipalities across the country. It covers a wide range of factors that affect how much energy a building uses over time. At its core, it focuses on building envelope, which is kind of the area of the building that's habitable most of the time. So building envelope doesn't necessarily include your basement or your attic, but your livable area within the building. And it focuses on insulation levels and walls, roofs, and floors, as well as performance of windows and doors. Also addresses air sealing and leakage. So it's all about making that building envelope tighter so that you don't have air flowing out or flowing in. Enhancing mechanical systems, so the mechanical systems are more efficient, don't use quite as much electricity or gas. Water heating systems and lighting power density, often requiring higher efficiency fixtures and controls. So a lot of the provisions in the 2024, ever sat in Laura's office talking with her and suddenly the lights go out? That little sensor in the wall, that's now required in the 2024 codes for both residential and commercial. So in theory, somebody could be sitting at home watching the basketball game and suddenly the lights go out, do this to get the lights to come back on. Yeah. There's It really is kind of interesting. They got provisions in there for socket switches, electrical outlets. So this equipment runs 24/7. But there would be a provision in the code that certain outlets are on a timer. At 5 o'clock, they go off. So you're not running equipment 24/7 in a room that no one's using it. And then if you ever walk down a hallway of a modern hotel, or even the grocery store, you'll kind of see those lights as you walk down the hall. That's a provision in the Energy Conservation Code. So again, it's all about saving energy. Yeah, we talk about the energy rating index or the HERS score. We use those terms kind of interchangeably, but they essentially mean the same thing. So we've amended a special section. I'm sorry, what was your question?
What is commissioning?
Conditioning? Oh, commissioning.
At the very end, it says system controls and commissioning. On that.
Code may also incorporate requirements for renewable energy readiness, system controls, and commissioning. So that'd be essentially reviewing the energy stipulations and signing off on those. So one of the requirements is that either the HERS rater or a designer of those energy efficiency systems, at the end of the day, they're going to provide a certificate that is literally attached to the mechanical wall by the furnace. And it gives a HERS rating, and it gives the amount of insulation and the rating of the windows. That's the commissioning of the building. In the commercial buildings, they'll require that there's actually a manual with all that information about how to maintain those systems. All that's part of the commissioning process. And that would be something that Courtney would be reviewing when he's doing his final inspection of the building to make sure that those things are in place. So we amended special inspections, tests, and inspections in the IECC to allow the building official to require the following tests: air barrier, air tightness, insulation, thermal envelope, duct sealing, leakage. All of those are tests that are done through the construction process. So we'd be hiring a third party, or the builder, the contractor would be hiring a third party to go out and make sure the barrier is in place and that's proper, that the building is tight, that insulation is being installed in a correct manner, that all the ductwork is being sealed in a correct way. And all of that has to be signed off on as part of that commissioning process at the end. And I kind of just stopped here and I went back and I looked at our 2022 greenhouse gas study. And I thought this was a real good diagram. It kind of shows in a nutshell where a lot of our energy consumption and emission is going. So we had hired consultants to come in and do this greenhouse gas study. They had reviewed energy bills, not only of the city, but throughout the community. And then they determined energy usage throughout the community. And interestingly enough, most of the energy use is on the commercial side and the electrical side. About 21% is residential electricity, and about 30% is actually residential natural gas. And they've also noted too, off to the right, these kind of notable trends. More emissions come from electricity than from natural gas. Commercial building generate more emissions than residential buildings, we just noted. And then commercial energy emissions has actually decreased by 39% since the last study was done in 2007. And residential energy emissions decreased by 37% since the last study was done in 2007. So again, with the adoption of the 2024 energy conservation codes, we hope to continue to try to lower that consumption and continue that decrease. Okay, as we stated earlier with the IRC, we're also proposing with the International Energy Conservation Code to amend the energy rating index or the HERS score to 60. So that's to be kind of consistent across the board with the IRC and the IECC. Currently, as I stated earlier, it's 53. And then Westwood and Roland Park have recently adopted their codes to reflect HERS score of 60. As I stated earlier, other cities in Johnson County are still considering their HERS rating score that they want to target. Most of them are looking at about 65, give or take.
What does it take to make that 7-point difference? Is that a statistically significant difference? I mean, what does it take to make that difference?
It's going to require at the end of the day, probably much more insulation, higher rated thermal energy saving windows. Basically at the end of the day, more money, to put it bluntly, yes. That's what the contractors are going to tell you, the home builders will.
And just as a point of reference for those who remember the conversations we had around the 2021 codes, which the city of Kansas City, Missouri did adopt, and Courtney has some of that, lived experience, but the HERS rating, the base HERS rating in that was 58. So it's gone down a little bit between 21 and 24, but they've modified the pathways. They've improved the pathways in 2024 from the 2021 energy efficiency codes in providing builders and contractors multiple ways to achieve that score versus a very, if I understood it, prescriptive and rigid structure under the 2021 codes.
Yeah. I think probably the best example, Wanda, would be air conditioning systems. So air conditioners are rated on a seasonal energy efficiency rating or a SEER rating. Most people, when their air conditioner goes out, they'll just buy the cheapest air conditioner they can get, which has a SEER rating of about 13 or 14. But if you go up to 17 or 18, that's more energy efficient. That's kind of sort of middle of the road of energy efficiency. If you go to 21 or 22, that's super energy efficient. It's also almost double the cost of the 13 or 14 one. So.
Help me understand why we're recommending 60 instead of 53. I'm not following.
Again, I think it's to be consistent with most of the cities in Johnson County. They're right around 65 or 60. And I think, if we go to 53, we're going to experience a lot of pushback from the contractors and the building community. They'll tell you it's cost. And I've already heard from some of the builders, they're doing multifamily. They're looking at about $10,000 in additional cost for each unit to adopt the 2024 Energy Conservation Code. So again, if you're setting that standard higher, there's more costs associated with it. Like my air conditioner example, they're going to push back.
So this covers even apartments, or is this all just single family?
Apartments as well, all commercial
okay.
buildings, apartments, single family homes. Yeah.
Okay.
That's certainly something as we go out and take this out to stakeholder groups. I mean, that's part of why we're here this evening. This is kind of where staff has landed with a recommendation. If you, want to move to that 53, we can take that out and, offer that as part of the stakeholder discussions and bring that feedback as well. I think part of the thought process as well is if you think about where we are today at 80, and going to 60 is a pretty significant drop. But again, this is, these are policy decisions, and they're your policy decisions.
Yeah, I guess I'd like to know more about what it actually takes to get to 60 versus 53, right? I don't particularly care what the builder says it takes because, again, if we're going to do single family homes, odds are there's going to be a couple of them and they're probably going to go under the 2018 SB 418 provision, so whatever. But for everything else, likely if it's multifamily, it's going to be pushed, they're going to push these costs onto renters. So of course they don't care about the ongoing costs, but we should care. So I'd like to just know a little bit more about how much of a burden really is it and how much of a benefit really is it. 60 and 53 mean basically nothing to me. So,
Yeah. And I,
yep.
So given like just the timeline of like how we're talking about this, would Encore and Block, if they're like approved, like we move forward, are they going to be building to 2018 or 2024? I know that might be, I think we've talked about this before
yeah,
too.
they'll probably be building in 2018.
Okay,
So Encore submitted their plans last week.
right.
Mhm.
Okay. So based on when they
Yep.
submitted.
And when we met with Block a few weeks ago to start talking about their preliminary development plan, going through their zoning entitlements, they were very antsy about us adopting the 2024 codes.
Say that again.
They were very nervous about us adopting the 2024 codes. They want to get in before we adopt.
I just.
So they were asking me about timeline and when do we think we're going to adopt, and
Yeah, I'm kind of like with Ben, where like we have these like two pretty big developments already building to 2018.
Now,
You know-
remember that you're incentivizing to a higher lead standard, which is
Sure.
going to push them beyond
Okay,
the base of 2018.
okay,
Okay, so that's where at this point, without the codes driving kind of that fundamental baseline, that we have the opportunity to incentivize for that higher level of sustainability.
okay.
And I think another thing those developers probably would say is there's a practicality to it. No matter what we adopt, they probably don't want to have to go back and redo it, right? So whether or not they're against the energy efficiency stuff, I think at this stage is maybe less relevant than they don't want to just have the rules changed when they're about to submit. So
Well, and I think part of it is if you think about the process for preliminary development plan submittal and approval, granted, those are not building plans that are at the level which can be submitted for permitting and review. But that's what they're basing their project costs on. And that's what, when we're coming and they're talking about a request for incentives, that's what it's based on. And if you think about the amount of time that transpires between when we look at that preliminary development plan and when they get to actual construction, if the rules of the game change, that upsets the entire apple cart in terms of whatever incentive deal we've renegotiated. And so I think that's why we've been pretty persistent in the requests that we've considered and the agreements that we've signed. The lanes was pushed to a LEED silver certification. So even though their plans may have been submitted under 2018 codes, there were other things that they had to do to achieve the LEED silver certification that would close that gap in terms of particularly energy efficiency or other sustainability pieces. Same thing. We were very prescriptive in the first phase of the block agreement in terms of there was a staggered incentive about reaching those. But I think part of that is understanding that they're negotiating their deals under one set of codes and one estimated set of budgets. And so it's difficult to have that change once they get to they negotiate the deal and then move to construction.
Mhm.
It will be easier if we change the codes as we have new projects potentially that come forward for us to say, you're going to be building to this. And then I think that will change the lens that we use to look at how we incentivize even beyond what's in the base codes for those type of projects.
Okay. Just
Does that make sense?
comment, even though it's higher cost initially, in the long run, that supposedly saves money, correct? The higher the rating.
in theory, yes.
yeah, I can get the Department of Energy studies back out, but yeah, they're pretty well studied to pay themselves back these costs, according to the Department of Energy.
So you're saying it does work?
Mm-hmm. If you believe the Department of
What
Energy.
does in theory mean? You're not convinced?
It depends on who you ask. The Energy Department will say yes, and the contractor will probably say no.
Well, the contractor's not going to get paid back the energy costs ever.
Well,
So
that's because he's done his,
Yeah.
Yeah.
he's put the cost out. Yeah.
And developers, they're at a price point, they, they have these apartments they can only rent to a certain price point in the market, so they're kind of confined within that. And most likely they'll sell the building a few years down the road and somebody else has it, so.
Councilmember Camosa has been waiting patiently.
Yeah, no, I'm just curious, and I know Laura mentioned that was kind of like last minute changing. Do you know why Shawnee opted to stay with their 70 HERS rating? What the logic was with
I
that?
don't, I can,
I can guess at that based on a
Yeah.
previous conversation. So this is all being driven by Senate Bill 418. And so particularly in a larger city like Shawnee, where you're seeing much more development, particularly single family properties, part of that is a staff capacity issue. Am I going to run two separate sets of codes parallel to one another in terms of plan review and permitting processes? For us, while it's not an insignificant consideration at the number of single family properties that we're building, I think we have more options than some of, I think that's probably why you see a Gardner or an Olathe. Again, as Brian mentioned, some of these higher growth cities are really looking at it. It's a capacity issue. And, and I think Courtney lived through the transition to 2021 in Kansas City, Missouri. It can be really, really challenging when you make the transition to a new code, let alone trying to navigate two sets of codes potentially. So I think that's the largest driver.
And that's one thing I'm just trying to have us all keep in mind is that a lot of these bigger cities with a lot of greenfield, single family development have to worry about it a lot more than we will. So.
Thanks.
But I do think it affects our ability to compete what our codes are, correct? If our codes are totally out of line of the other people, we can't compete with them.
I would contend that depends on what we think we want to compete for. So we're never going to compete for single family subdivisions because we just don't have the space for it. I think you can see that the interest that we've had in other development, particularly multifamily development, we're going to continue to have because of our location, our highway access, our proximity to downtown. There's a whole host of other things that are driving that allows us to compete in addition to the continuing housing shortage throughout the county and the metro.
yeah, kind of on that note, 2024 IECC has a number of appendices that we have reviewed, and a few of them we're considering for your adoption. And a lot of these appendices kind of provide optional guidance and tools and additional compliance pathways for energy savings. They advance efficiency measures or alternative approaches, giving communities more flexibility beyond the minimum code. And they really kind of serve as a policy bridge. So they help to advance policy goals around energy conservation, energy efficiency. So going on to the next slide. We are proposing adoption of solar-ready provisions for both commercial and residential buildings. So essentially what we'd be saying is that roofs on buildings have to be built to support the additional weight of any solar panels, which is really, as Courtney was saying earlier, most roofs today are built that way anyway, so it's not really much of a difference.
The mission buildings are built like that.
Yeah.
Most, okay.
Yeah, and a lot of your solar panels are becoming lighter and lighter in weight. So they're not these big, heavy glass panels that we're used to seeing in people's backyards, or more like the size of this paper. They're kind of almost put in like tiles. So conduit provided from the roof through the building back to the electrical panel, usually in the basement or the mechanical room of the building. Larger electrical panel to provide for additional circuits to support those solar panels if and when they're ever installed. And then appendices CG and RE, electrical vehicle charging infrastructure for both commercial and residential buildings. And again, some of the same provisions, conduit provided connecting the EV spaces to the electrical panel in the building, larger electrical panel to allow for additional circuits, and then a percentage of EV ready as opposed to actual charging stations. So again, you're going to allocate a number of your parking spaces for EV ready, and they'll have a conduit, some wiring, maybe a post for that charging station, but the charging station is not actually there. And a certain percentage of those parking spaces would actually have the charging station there.
Brian, I understand that these are for, new building and everything, but with the fire hazards with EV stations and such, are we providing good guidance for our citizens that are doing these things in the older homes that would have been built in 38?
Yeah, it's a good point. We can, yeah. And
I just think the fire dangers,
Yeah.
they're not understanding that.
yeah. And I will note, we didn't go over the fire code tonight, but there's some provisions in the fire code around EV charging stations that we added. And we've shared those with our fire marshal, Todd Kirkhoff, so he's reviewing those.
I just have a question. When you're talking, you're not asking all residential buildings to have EV.
All new construction, yeah.
Yes?
Mhm.
Wow. EV ready.
Right. Finally, Appendix RK, electrical ready residential building provisions. So it's required new home construction to be equipped with electrical outlets for the stove, clothes dryer, and hot water heater. So most homes have an electrical outlet already for a stove or clothes dryer. Sometimes people prefer to have gas. They like to have that gas stove. That's kind of the gourmet type stove. Certainly can have that, but we're requesting that you have the electrical outlet available if anybody ever wants to install electrical stove in the future. And if you wire directly back to that electrical panel, as opposed to being kind of wired into the circuitry of the house. So if something were to happen and the panel, the breaker switch flipped, you're not going to bring down the electrical system for the rest of the house. So the EV charging stations. We literally lifted this table right out of the code book. And it's table CG 101.2.1, required EV power transfer infrastructure. And on the right, it lists all the occupancies. So codes are written around occupancies, and you'll often, when reading through the codes, hear references to Group A or Group H or R3, R4, which to none of us but Courtney does not make any sense at all. So I put the definition next to each one. So Group A would be assembly, and that's going to be churches, community centers, things of that nature. Kind of gaming or entertainment type is like movie theaters, things like that. Office is obvious. Educational, 1 through 12 grade. So it's not university, it's just basically your grammar high school. Industrial, places that deal with hazardous materials, which we don't really have any emission. Hospital nursing, Group M is mercantile, so that's general retail. R1 is hotel motel. R2 is apartments. R3 and R4 is skilled nursing. You only have one skilled nursing facility here in Mission. S is storage units. Then S2 is storage of parking garages, so a parking garage, storage of vehicles. And then we have EVSE spaces, so that's an actual charging station. EV ready space would be, as I described earlier, a space that's almost ready to have a charging unit installed. So you got the conduit back to the building, you have wire in it, you probably have a mounting unit there. All you have to do is hang a unit on it and plug it in and away you go. And the EV capable spaces are going to be more just the conduit and not the actual mounting or wiring or any of that. in the right-hand code that's white, the code is recommending these percentage of parking spaces. So as an example, assembly, 10% of the spaces would be actual EV charging spaces. Another 10% would be EV capable with the conduit.
So the staff recommendation is what is
In the yellow.
be what you guys are recommending we adopt as opposed to what, okay, gotcha.
So that's the yellow. So we've kind of gone through and looked at this table. And we're proposing lower percentages for each of these different groups. So again, for Assembly A, the code is proposing 10. For EV ready, we're proposing 5. R1 hotels, the code is proposing 20% of the parking be EV ready. We're proposing 10. And then for S2, which is basically parking garages, again, the code is proposing 15, we're proposing 10. Actual EV charging stations. And so you kind of read across from there. We can go to the next slide.
Hang on, just why are we recommending lower numbers on the capable spaces? That seems like the installation that's the cheapest to do up front versus what it costs to tear up the concrete later. So from my point of view, why, put it in, tell them to put it in now so they don't have to go bust up the concrete if they want to later. So I'm wondering why that's the cheapest column, right? The EV capable spaces is just,
Yeah, that'd be the least expensive. Again, there'll be a cost factor with that, the conduit and, the additional sizing of your panel box, for additional circuits in the future. There's always a cost associated with that.
so why are we recommending lower numbers then?
I think it's just to kind of be reflective of the community a little bit, and again, knowing we're going to get some pushback about cost, trying to kind of beat that to the curve a little bit. We certainly that's a policy decision of the city council. If you want to go with what's recommended in the code for EV capable spaces, we can certainly do that.
Yeah, I don't, again, I'm not sure. I just think anytime we're second guessing the ICC, who's probably had this same conversation you and I are having about 5 billion times, I don't know better than them. So
I'll show you the next slide. This is what Westwood proposed in their code adoption. So it's drastically less than what we're proposing. And they're not basing it on group types. They're just basing on parking spaces. Parking space is a parking space, whether it's an apartment building or in front of a hamburger stand or an office building. But basically really, they don't require parking spaces until 21 and 25. Actual EV dedicated charging stations in the parking lot. They're only requiring 2% at that point. If it's over 26 parking spaces, they're going to 3%. Actual EV charging stations. So most cities are not adopting this appendice. So this is a little bit different for everybody else. And again, it's kind of a recognition of the city council's overall goals to achieve greater energy efficiency and greater sustainability.
So if we were not to adopt the appendix, then there would be no requirements in the IECC related to EV.
Correct.
But say that again.
So the body of the energy efficiency code, once we adopt it, is mandatory. The appendices are provided, and if you go back a couple of slides to kind of the description of appendices. So if you look at, keep going, right here. So those give you kind of additional compliance pathways. Again, think about the appendices as ways to align more closely with your goals, your objectives, your values as a community, what you're seeing, what you want to accomplish in the built environment. And so they're really advanced efficiency measures, things that aren't in that base energy efficiency code. And so it gives us the chance to go beyond those minimum requirements in areas where we want to. If we choose to adopt those, they then do become mandatory. And so we can use those sometimes in a variety of different ways. We can go all in and we can try it and see what happens. We can pull that appendix out in the future if it doesn't work or if there's a lot of pushback. We can use that as a policy bridge and adopt the appendix amended, kind of see how that goes. We can continue to amend that in future. We don't have to wait till the next code cycle, for example, to amend that. And so that's one thing to consider. But again, if you would like us to sort of take the pure table from that appendix CG, we can also certainly do that and bring, again, this is for your feedback tonight. Next step will be, and Brian will cover this in a minute, other stakeholder feedback, come back to you, figure out what direction you want to go with all of that information.
I'm a little confused, which is not unusual, but so the recommendations in the white are from the IEC,
Correct.
but we actually didn't improve on them. We minimized them. Is that not correct?
Reduce
So-
them, yeah.
So an appendices actually is an exception from what they're recommending. Is that not?
The appendices is an additional tool. So you have the code that has a set of regulations. The appendices are options that can be adopted by the city to help further advance energy conservation, energy efficiency.
So it isn't a change of the original.
It's not a change of the original code.
It's just
an
an
addition to the
addition.
original code.
And a
Well,
modification.
I'm still confused because if you've got the recommendation of the IEC in the white and we've got the yellow, which minimizes that's a change.
Right, so
We would have to amend we would adopt an amended appendix in that
Yep.
situation. Just
we're
like,
proposing to adopt an appendices, but it's amended.
We're amending the recommendation.
Yeah.
With an appendices.
Yeah. It's not their recommendation, it's their standard. I mean, that's, if you adopt the appendices, this is the requirement. And we're suggesting that we amend that requirement if we were to adopt the appendices.
Mhm.
it's just like the HERS rating. So the code says HERS rating 53. And our amendment that we've presented and discussed tonight is to amend that to 60. So we would be,
But that's
it's the same thing. Trust me, I spent, Brian can tell you that the appendices hurt my brain. Trying to figure out how they fit together with pieces of the puzzle and which ones, and there's a whole list of appendices which we did not bring forward for consideration because we didn't feel like they fit with either where we are as a community or the goals that we have set at this point. We might want to look at those in the future, but these were the ones that as we went through that process, we've talked about solar ready. We've talked about building out EV capacity. So this is really a conversation around speed at which we might want to require EV build out. And then the last one relates to existing residential or residential.
I guess my only concern is we're so in a flux about energy efficiency. I mean, we don't know where that's going. A lot of those incentives are being retracted. So I trying to figure it out.
You're in good company.
I think the upside, right, is if we want to change the HERS rating, we just pass an ordinance, right? If we want to change this table, we just pass an ordinance
Right.
anytime. So we're not, wedded to these until the next code cycle.
Okay, energy EV charging infrastructure for residential. This would apply to new 1 and 2 family dwellings and townhomes with a designated attached or detached garage or some kind of on-site private parking. And the code will require one EV capable space or EV ready space per dwelling unit. So essentially, if you're going to build a single family home with a garage, one of those spaces in that 2-car garage has to be EV ready. And for apartments, it would allocate 20% of the parking for EV capable spaces. For EV ready spaces, 10% of that number would be an actual EV space.
And you didn't make any amendments from the appendix RE on those percentages for multifamily?
No, I left that out and I put that,
So if you go back to the yellow
Appendices,
chart,
right,
it
yeah.
says Group R2 apartments, see Appendix RE.
yeah.
So we haven't amended. So for the kind of development that we're seeing the majority of right now, we are not recommending that we move away from the recommendation in the appendix. Correct?
Mhm.
Yes. And then for any of the new builds, having people invest in that EV capable, an EV ready piece.
Sorry, I know you're on next steps.
Don't be sorry.
So I know that we have a number of parking lots at the moment that already have some EV spaces, like functional, potentially allocated. Have we ever like wandered by and checked to see how frequently they are in use? Not the residential ones, obviously. It's harder to tell, but like I trust y'all's recommendation, but just to make sure that I ask the question, like, is it based on some sort of count of active use of the EV spaces that we do have already?
No, I can't say we've ever gotten that detailed.
Okay.
We've never gone around
I
formally
didn't-
inventoried EV charging stations that are in existence and how they're being used. But no, we've not done a scientific survey. But
I mean, part of it is, I think if you look at the categories and if you think about what building types exist in our community, that probably drove some of those recommendations. We do have several on private property. And then I might ask Justin to just speak to, because he's managing the installation of several EV charging stations at public facilities that has been slow moving, but moving.
Yeah, there's a countywide project going on that Johnson County's taken the lead on that was through some federal grant money with a 20% local match that we are participating in and budgeted for. So I wouldn't know off the top of my head the total number of sites going in, but for us, we're adding 4 chargers and then 2 at the community center and 2 at Broadmoor as part of that. So, but there are a lot, there's quite, I think over 100 probably countywide, I think are going in as part of that.
At farm, whatever that, not Hy-Vee, there's some over there at the pharmacy business, Script Pro, at Script Pro.
I'm sure Script Pro has added. There are also I still think of it as Brill Eye Clinic, and it's not that any longer. It's the dermatology clinic that sits north of the CVS on Lamar. They have several charging stations installed. The Postal Service just went to an entire parking lot full of EV charging stations. So we're seeing them sort of pop up, but again,
yeah, the Postal Service is moving to EV vehicles through our entire fleet. So they basically made all these improvements to their parking lot, including installing EV charging stations for all their vehicles. But with that said, there is a growing demand for EV charging stations. I happened to look the other day, and I think about 7% of new vehicle sales in the past year have been EV. And that's up considerably from, I think, 1% back in 2020 or 2%. It could be any type, yeah.
It can be any type, it can
Yeah.
be fast or slow.
Yeah.
Okay.
No.
Okay, next steps. So again, we're interested in soliciting your feedback tonight. Our intent is to take these amendments in the PowerPoint presentation and the memo that I drafted and place it on our city's website, just to kind of start soliciting folks to review and kind of get some input that way. And we're also interested in convening a stakeholder forum sometime in the next few weeks and sending an invitation out to contractors, those folks we've done business with in the last few years have been building here in Mission, and soliciting their feedback. Of course, there'll be some that can't make the forum, so we're more than open to having one-on-one meetings with those to kind of gather information. And then bringing these comments back to you all in June for further review and discussion. And then kind of based on that process, either adoption in June or July, with possible implementation around October.
So how do you advertise for this group?
We'll have to send out emails.
People are watching.
Yeah.
What'd you say?
They're watching and following along. There's people who are, so the larger communities, for example, Overland Park and some of Leawood and other places actually convene as they're going through that staff review process. They're doing kind of a stakeholder review. So there are people who are actively following and follow every code adoption cycle process and comment on that. So both advocates for some of the stricter, energy efficiency requirements as well as other things. In fact, we had the Kansas Gas Service that reached out to us and wanting to make sure that they had seen that it was coming up on our agenda, and wanting to make sure that they could participate and provide some feedback as we moved through the process. So
I just feel like, just from being here, just the little short time that I've been here, which is almost a year, I guess. I get concerned because I think that the average constituent, and this has nothing to do with what you guys do, because you do a good job. Everything's open, but they're clueless about accessing this information. And so I really would, that's what I get concerned about, is that we get a real representation from our constituents. And I don't know how to do that.
Yeah, it's going to be the webpage. So instead of just kind of putting it in a packet, putting it out there in typical fashion, let's put it on our webpage with all this information. And then we just kind of send out their social media, maybe put articles and the monthly newsletter. Go look at this website, go look at the information, study it. If you want to provide comments, contact us with your comments. I think for most people, I'll probably put them to sleep, but there'll be the one or two that are interested. Yeah.
That's true. But when then they have a problem and they're coming to you and you think, well, we've said all this and they have no idea about it. That's really frustrating for them.
That's every day
for
for
us.
us.
that happened.
Constantly answering phone calls with zoning questions, and what's on the webpage. Well, they don't go look at the webpage. Yeah. And a lot of this, frankly, and this is kind of what I've talked with Courtney and Devin about, and Anisha too. At the end of the day, we have to implement all of this. And it's easy just to put it on our webpage and tell a contractor, go look at the webpage. Well, those guys work out of the front seat of their pickup truck. They come in here in jeans and dirty boots and they want to pull a building permit. They're not going to go look at the webpage and try to absorb all this. We need to give them a packet of information in paper that they can take with them and look through this. And, oh, they're requiring energy ready in my home now. And I have to have it solar ready. What's that mean? And kind of sit down and go over with them so they understand this before they actually submit construction documents. So it's going to be a big education for everybody. That is the conclusion of my presentation.
Councilmember
Let
Craig.
me ask you a quick question. How are we addressing sump pumps and alternative drainage issues with, we have certain properties, I guess they've been grandfathered in, who have an alternative septic. Exactly. Thank you.
Oh, septic. Okay.
Well, there's some provisions that are in the code
Okay.
and there are amendments that we made. the same amendment we've been making every year, 2018, 2012. Sump pumps and gutters cannot be directed into the sanitary sewer system. That is a violation of the Johnson County wastewater rules. They don't want all of that storm water going to their system and surcharging during a rain event, and they're having to process all of that in Nelson. So, and we'll find examples of that around town, and we'll tell the homeowner, you can't do that. Johnson County wastewater actually has a program where they'll help people to pay to correct that issue. A lot of these older homes back in the day when they were built, that's what they did. They would just take that sump pump and direct it into sanitary sewer. They actually did a program around Mill Haven, kind of North Overland Park, about a year or two ago. They did what's called smoke testing. And they'd drop a smoke bomb into the sanitary sewer and they'd watch it come out someone's toilet or something like that. And they kind of figure out something's not right here. So they go into their home and they would find these issues and they would pay to have it corrected. They would take care of it for the homeowner. Now,
How many properties do we have that are on septic systems?
the septic tank, there was another provision. So you remember last summer, we adopted the Johnson County Sanitary Code. And so Johnson County has provisions for properties that are on septic tank systems. And we kind of rely on them to take care of it. We have a handful of homes in Mission. They're mostly on Dearborn, north of 51st Street. Ironically enough, right in the backyard of the Nelson treatment plant. But just, you know, if anybody's familiar with that neighborhood, it's very hilly and a lot of the homes are very old. And there was just never a proper sanitary sewer system that was installed. And so a lot of those homes are septic tanks.
So if you go through a property exchange, somebody's selling their house,
The real estate agent is required to notify Johnson County of that sale. It's on the septic tank and it has to be inspected as part of the sale.
Okay.
And then we know about that too. So if anybody comes in and, oh, hey, that address is on a septic tank,
Right.
there's some provisions about that. So,
They're kind of hard to keep up. I mean, septic tanks are but a lot of trouble.
yeah.
Everyone.
We had one home just off of Dearborn, 50th Street, maybe 49th Street, that was basically torn down and rebuilt. They were close enough to the sanitary sewer main. They were within 100 feet. They had to connect to the sanitary sewer main. Yeah.
And we've talked with that neighborhood. I mean, I was one of the very first things I did when I got here 20 years ago. Because we can go in and coordinate, but the homeowners have to pay a portion of that connection. And even with as expensive and difficult as it is to maintain the septic system, the cost shock of that has been something that has deterred them from wanting to move forward with.
And if they're not maintaining the septic tank, they're maintaining the grinder pumps that
Yeah.
pump it up to the main that's been installed. Yeah.
thank you, Brian.
Okay.
Okay. Any additional questions?
Okay.
Thank you.
And that concludes our work session. Okay, that does not conclude our work session. Okay.
Thank you. I think Robin sent a reminder that
Stay away.
yes. Celebration for Springboard Creative's 20th anniversary tomorrow from 5 to 9 at the shop. I think everyone was invited there. And then on Friday morning, I will be at 8:30 a.m. in front of the post office. There will be a Stamp Out Hunger food drive. And the representative from the National Association of Letter Carriers reached out to the mayor recently and asked if anybody from the city would be willing to be there. She's unable. She has a conflict Friday morning. I will definitely be there. I'll take some donations. So it will be representatives from Price Chopper, Harvesters, the National Association of Letter Carriers, and the Postal Service. And it's really just a kind of a kickoff to a food drive and a hunger drive. So if anybody on the council would like to come and join, they haven't asked us to make a presentation or do anything like that, but just come kind of show support for that project. So I will be there.
Where's the food going?
I'm assuming it's going to Harvesters, but I can find that out since Harvesters is participating
Okay.
as a part of that.
8 a.m.
8:30 let me double check.
And
8:30 a.m.
in the lobby.
May 20, it says 6029 Broadmoor. Weather permitting, so I'm guessing we're gonna be outside somewhere. And I'll send out an email on that tomorrow, just so everybody has the details on that. And I think that concludes our work session this evening.
Okay. We're adjourned.